thank you all for joining me today and greatly appreciate it. Do what? I can neither, as I would tell a reporter, I can neither confirm nor deny. Wait till the end and see where you are, and we'll figure that out. This is something that kind of combines a lot of the research that I've been doing, along with some information and research based on the Catawba-YouGov poll that I've been playing with, and this is kind of really the first formal presentation of this information. So certainly welcome, bless you, encourage thoughts, ideas, criticisms, please bring it on. Would definitely love to have some. In terms of just a brief overview, I'm going to be talking about three basic questions starting off here. Where do we see the partisan divide? We know it exists. We know we feel it. We see it in the news. But where in North Carolina, kind of thinking about where do we see this partisan divide, the polarization? And then secondly, what might be some of the dynamics behind polarization and this deep, intense partisan divide? And then finally, some thoughts about maybe what the Catawba-YouGov Survey findings about a particular aspect of this partisanship and the polarization might be able to tell us in terms of trying to dig a little bit deeper, just beyond it's red versus blue in terms of the dynamics. So as kind of an overview, I always describe to any reporter that calls me about North Carolina, you oftentimes hear we're a battleground state, we're a competitive state. We are very much, in my mind, a stuck and bipolar competitive state. Because if you take the federal races from 2008 to 2024, so this time span of what I would call the new era in North Carolina politics, add up for president, for US Senate, you basically get a 49.7 to 47.7 split. If you take just the two parties, we're basically 51-49 Republican. But if you take the Council of State races, governor, lieutenant governor, auditor to treasurer, basically 10 elected statewide offices, again, kind of a 50.7 to 49. If you take the two-party vote, 51-49 in terms of the Democrats. So we are very much a kind of split dynamic when it comes to North Carolina and the new politics of the time. If you go before 2008, these numbers were much greater. The spread was much wider. But now we've kind of collapsed into a very narrow coin toss kind of dynamic at play. If you take 2004's presidential and the Council of State, I think you'll see this kind of play out. Presidential race, 51-48, Republican. The gubernatorial race, this is an outlier. And whenever people ask what happened here, I have one response: candidates matter. Candidates matter, or a 15-point gap. But if you look at the rest of all of the Council of State races, you see a pattern, a very clear pattern play itself out. These are all highly competitive races for North Carolina. And then if you add up the two-party vote, again, it's on the knife's edge of just adding up all of these races. You get that very much knife's edge approach. So North Carolina is a great state for political scientists to study. There's a lot. It's the Full Employment Act for political scientists, basically, in this state. In terms of also thinking about the polarization, we hear oftentimes about the urban-rural divide and how that gulf has been driven even greater. And this is one thing that I think North Carolina accurately reflects national dynamics. And if you take kind of the urban, suburban, rural dynamics at play, and this is using the federal government, So this is kind of OMB, the Office of Management and Budgets, classification, urban counties, the surrounding suburban counties, everything else considered to be rural. But early on, when I was thinking about this divide, you really have to think about urban counties in two distinct ways. You've got the central city of Charlotte, but then you've got places like Huntersville, Davidson, Mint Hill, Pineville, Matthews, kind of the classic urban suburbs. So really, in thinking about North Carolina, and I think the urban-rural dimensions, you've really got kind of four distinct areas: central cities and the urban suburbs within an urban county. This is from an August 2024 Catawba-YouGov poll that we did for the North Carolina Election Commission. And on every poll, we ask a very basic question: how do you identify? Democrat, Republican, Independent. And then we ask the question, if you're a partisan, are you a strong partisan, or are you not very strong, I don't foam at the mouth kind of thing? For the independents, do you lean to one party over the other, or are you a pure independent? The survey for the state basically shows us, with the partisan leaners included and just the pure independents, again, a pretty evenly divided dynamic at play. About 15% pure independents. So there's your kind of swing voters, if you want to. Compare this to the Democratic and Republican results, basically at the presidential level. You can kind of see where this base dynamic plays into the actual election results. Within the central cities, Charlotte's, Raleigh's, Asheville's, Winston-Salem, Greensboro's, much more heavily Democratic than Republican. And the election results bear that out. Basically, you can see within the central cities, and this has been a trend over several election cycles, 70-30 split. 70% Democratic, 30% Republican. The urban suburbs, almost an identical match in terms of partisan identification to the state as a whole. And when you look at the election results, while it's 54-46, that's competitive. At one point in 2016, the 2016 presidential election, urban suburbs were 50-50 between Clinton and Trump. And so they are the most competitive area of the state. They reflect the state very nicely. You move into the surrounding suburban counties, the counties around the urban areas. Unlike in the central cities, you've almost got the exact flip in terms of party identification. And in particular, suburban counties are the most Republican counties in the state. Because when you look at the rural counties, slightly more Republican, but almost as Republican. Typically, this is an outlier. It's usually 60-40 Republican. And usually the surrounding suburbs are 65-35. So this kind of paints a picture of the four different regions of North Carolina, playing again into that partisan divide. You've got 3 out of the 4 that are basically overwhelmingly one side, but it creates a very narrow state in that regard. In thinking about the geography of North Carolina, not just the regions, but the actual geography, a lot of political scientists are moving more and more into studying partisanship and polarization at the geographic level. And I took all 2,600 precincts of North Carolina and basically assigned them into categories of competitiveness, likely for one party over the other, or just overwhelmingly for one party over the other. This is North Carolina geographically. The darker the color, the more intense, 60% or greater, for that party. The lighter the color, the competitive precincts. Out of all 2,600, basically 70% of the precincts are overwhelmingly for one party over the other. We have very few competitive precincts. You can tell where Asheville is, Charlotte, Winston-Salem, Greensboro, Durham, Raleigh, all the major areas. But notice how deep the colors are in comparison to what we would think of as a competitive state. If you overlay the congressional boundaries, and we're hearing a lot about Congress, and just in the past 24 hours, I've done 4 different interviews about, is North Carolina going to redistrict again? The probable answer is yes. Because all but one of these districts are heavily to one party over the other. And the likely victim of a redistricting is going to be the 1st congressional district. This district, by all measurements, is basically a 50-50 district. And just to kind of give you a sense of things, notice this deep blue area up here. The likelihood, if I had to guess, they will take this area and merge it with the 13th congressional district, which is a heavy Republican district. And what you giveth, you have to take away. And so they'll basically move this blue into this deep red and move this deep red into a competitive district. Or they could take this area of deep blue, move it into the 3rd congressional district, and basically swap it with that region. And push the 1st congressional district, a competitive district, to basically, I don't want to say guaranteed Republican district, because nothing is going to be guaranteed until I get to next year about this time. But it will shift the dynamics tremendously in that regard. And so just thinking about geography and how these precincts tend to act is another, I think, example of the polarization and the division going on in the state. Just to give you some background, with the big swing towards the gubernatorial, we saw some precincts move in terms of the dynamics. What I like to do is combine the presidential and the gubernatorial races, and this gives me the big picture of how North Carolina is viewed. But again, deep reds, deep blues, very little competitive precincts. So even if you're trying to draw a competitive precinct, you ain't going to get one around here. It's going to be real hard to get one here. And even down into here, it can be a mixture as well. The other thing that we've noticed about North Carolina, and this is true also nationally, is that we have become calcified. Our voting patterns have become very rigid. And if you think about taking one set of elections and trying to think about how those areas might perform in the next election, thinking about the 2022 at the North Carolina House District results compared to what actually happened in 2024. So thinking as the Republican performance increases, we would think so too with the 2024 Republican precinct performance. And indeed, it pretty much lines up. So with this, I can see, all right, things in the previous election can be a pretty good indicator and predictor of things moving into the next election. That was the state house, state senate, even more so in terms of the dynamic. So we are basically sorted ourselves. We have solidified ourselves, and the partisan dynamic is intense in North Carolina. So we've got electoral dynamics, geographic dynamics, and the calcified voting dynamics, all at play to divide North Carolina up. The big question in my mind, is there something deeper? Is there something beyond just R's and D's? to kind of explain what's going on and what we could potentially think about doing to bridge the dynamic. And I got to thinking about this question based on Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind. And in it, he talks about the division between both politics and religion. But he says that there's basically an idea of what's called moral foundations, how people think about the principles that should govern the way that society should operate and the way that individuals should operate. And he classifies it into a number of categories. How much do you care about something versus harm, fairness, loyalty, respect for authority, sanctity. And he's actually got a kind of test that he has administered and uses as kind of examples in this book to kind of get a sense of the dynamics of how things play out. And just to kind of give a real brief overview here, the questions aren't about how, excuse me, how important, but how much do these different ideas, how much do you see in terms of relevance? How relevant are they to you? And then you also ask the question, what's your ideology? From very liberal to very conservative. The first question about care, from the very liberal to the very conservative, note a decrease in terms of how relevant that particular dynamic is. Fairness kind of mirrored that. When thinking about the others, it's almost kind of the exact opposite. But again, you see a kind of divide going on. The other one's authority and then sanctity. And his point is basically, if you look at the very liberal, see how far apart they are. If you look at the very conservative, see how narrow they are, how tightly bound they are. And his argument is basically the difference is how much relevance each different side sees and how important are the differences in those relevancies. Now, like any good academic, there's going to be a counterpart to Haidt. And I came across this book, The Two Moralities, Ronnie Janoff Bullman, and her work basically argues it's not so much, it is moral foundations, but it's actually two different types of moral foundations. One is the basic social order, how people look at society, how it should be ordered, and all of these different aspects to it, versus the thinking about social justice. Instead of protecting the group, you're providing for the group. It's all instead of us versus them. Anybody guess which one would be aligned with the conservative view? Social order, exactly. And therefore, the liberal political beliefs would be aligned with social justice. So I thought, I've got a perfect experiment to gauge public opinion of it. And so I literally took the questions that Haidt used. I took some of the questions that Janoff Bullman used and asked North Carolinians back in March how they saw and lumped all the groups together into their respective categories and then divided out by ideology. Now, I will say up front, these numbers and these numbers are very small. But I'm just looking to see what kind of pattern emerges. For the very liberals, there's how they were grouped. Up top, social justice, care, fairness, those were the highest in terms of relevance. The lowest, authority, social order, purity. Notice what happens as you move towards very conservative. Wide breadth, thickness. Now, this authority thing has me a little intrigued. And that's something for a later. Yeah. That's going to be separate. That's going to be another, I think, singular focus on. I then lumped very liberal with conservative, very conservative, just to get the numbers up, but the pattern kind of remains the same. Wide focus here, really tight relevancy there. Broke it out by partisan identification. So much of what ideology and partisanship now is so intricately tied together. The Democrats plus the leaners towards the pure independents, towards Republicans. Not as great a dispersion, but still the pattern seems to hold of tightness among Republicans spread out among Democrats. Also then looked at the geographic dynamics. And this one is kind of a wash. Nothing really going on. So obviously ideology, partisanship is playing the greater role in the terms of these dynamics. So with that said, the answers to the questions, pretty much anywhere that you look, you can see the partisan division, the geographic divisions, the calcification in terms of our voting patterns, the dynamics and factors that demonstrate it. I'm really interested, and I want to do some more digging and perhaps another poll of this relevance of societal principles is basically what I'm calling it, to kind of see where we can continue to kind of dig into this dynamic. Because I think what oftentimes people ask is, how are we going to get over the divide? How are we going to address the polarization? And it's not going to be necessarily a matter of, you've got to see me on my political issues and ideas, but maybe it's more, maybe it's deeper. What values are you bringing to the discussion? And then have the conversation based off of that. And with that, I'll throw it open to questions. Yes.
What is partisan?
What is partisanship? That is an excellent question. So partisanship is basically, how do you identify with a political party? Are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? Are you neither one? Are you an independent? And what we know in political science research is partisanship, how you see yourself aligning with a political party, has become so much of your identification. The intensity of partisan identification is what's driving so much of what we're seeing today. Does that help? Exactly. Excellent question. Yes.
Good question.
Two-parter.
So in going back to the spread of the social order versus social justice,
Yeah.
in any of those forms, I guess the one that has the largest spread would be this one. Among the raw data, so this is very specific.
Okay.
Did you see any particular outlier in the frequencies of responses? So like highly relevant among liberals versus, was there some any particular that had a low like frequency at a higher level or a lower level?
They all kind of had a pretty tight standard deviation, I would say, in terms of when I lumped all the questions associated with each category. They were pretty tight to their means. So there wasn't great dispersion within them. I need to run a couple more. I want to look at a couple different other characteristics, race, gender, maybe, just to see what may play out of it. But nothing stood out to me in terms of that. Second.
Second one would be any of the population, so geography map. When looking at that, you have overwhelmingly dark red, and I think when some visualizations can get a a little overwhelming
Mhm.
when looking at it. And
Sure.
Has there been any consideration to do, and this is gonna, the way I'm gonna say this, is gonna sound weird, but sizing, so the representation of that county.
Yep.
Going by size of
Yep.
population, so that when looking at this, it
Yeah.
can be clear of, where are the, I mean, these are the people who know.
Where the people live.
Carolina
Yeah.
demographics, we know where people live, but also there are some of those rural counties that have a larger population.
Right.
Than some of the other rural counties.
Right.
So where that dispersion lies.
Yeah, so this is just very simple categorization in terms of their performance. What you're getting at is kind of almost layering a third dimension to raise out the dynamics. I'll be honest. I originally thought, okay, I could code these and hand do each precinct. And I kind of said, no, that's not what I need to spend 8 hours doing. But I was actually able to get AI to generate this. So after a couple of turns and noticing it was slowly improving its capabilities, I finally got it to where, yes, this is the map. What you're talking about is particularly here, it would come out big. Here, it would come out big. There would be very little bars in that. So yes, there are political scientists who study political geography who use that dynamic to show the scale, because with 100 counties, it only takes 12 counties to get to 50% of all the votes cast in North Carolina. Mecklenburg, Wake, Durham, Guilford, Forsyth, those counties. So yes, this does not show the power of the numbers. This is just the classification dynamics. Yeah. Other questions? I haven't quite figured out.
Have someone that I can connect you to.
Excellent. I would love that. Thank you. Yes.
So, you may not know the answer, so just the
I'll make it
darkness
up.
of the color, that's okay. Has that changed over the time? And not the red, blue, but the dark, right?
Yeah.
As you're saying, or is it, because I feel like, there's pockets of pink and light blue.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as to whether historically we've had that many pockets of those lighter colors. Which way are we moving to? More light colored or more darker, either one?
That's a great question. And I can say 2020 and 2024 have been fairly consistent at the presidential level in terms of just looking at 2020, 2024. Most of the precincts line up exactly where they are. The unfortunate problem is going past 2020, the data, North Carolina counties did not pull their early votes and assign them back into the precincts. So they're all lumped in this one category called early voting. And I can't do anything about it. But in 2020, the state board mandated you have to, if somebody votes early, you have to reassign their ballot back to the precinct. So that way I get this. And with more North Carolinians voting early, that helps me. Unfortunately, the data doesn't give me the flexibility of going back in time. I would hypothesize, I would agree with you. This has, if I did 2000, this would be a very different map, because there would be honestly a lot more blue down here and a lot more blue up here. But we've got that rural realignment going on, and the intensity of nationalization has really brought things to bear.
A lot with off year non-presidential election years, or is that not finalized?
I would probably, another good question. I would probably do just midterms because odd years like this year, you don't get anybody showing up. Midterms, depending on the type of it, I mean, that's the truth. Well, thank you. I mean, you will be one of maybe very few. Okay, there's 10 of y'all. Y'all are outliers. Accept it and move on, kind of thing. Midterms, I have to be careful with midterms because we get these blue moon election cycles where there's no state law that play. But yeah, that could be a potential. Somebody had it.
Historically, why is there so much blue in that northeastern quadrant of the state outside of urban?
So this area, and traditionally this area is what's known as the Black Belt. In the US South, starting in Virginia, moving through here into South Carolina, down basically from here down to here are the counties known as the Black Belt. High slave population, high cotton production, and that has lasted over 200 years. Now, this is relatively new because this tells me things are falling apart, at least in North Carolina. This is pretty consistent. This is moving in a direction that a lot of people who study North Carolina closely.
What's falling apart?
It's the rural racial polarization going on.
So the rural population is changing according to racial.
The rural white population has moved and realigned themselves much more Republican. These were kind of classic Southern conservative Democrats. And particularly after 2016, they said, sorry, granddaddy, I'm voting Republican and now moving Republican in that regard.
So,
Yes.
Within the congressional districts, right?
Potentially. But yeah, it's going to happen.
Change, make it so North Carolina more often come out as Republican.
Yes, that basically we have 14 congressional districts. So these are 14 different seats in the US House of Representatives. Right now, it's 10-4 Republican over Democratic. This is a Democratic district. This is a Democratic district, Democratic district, Democratic district. If they wanted to pick up one, this is the easiest one to adjust. There is a possibility that they could also go after these districts. And it's, instead of doing what they've done here, called packing Democratic voters into one district, they could crack them. This is a perfect example of a donut. If you want to pack something in, you do a donut. If you want to crack them and put this slice into this district and this slice into that district and this slice into that district, think of a pizza. They would basically just split Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, move these deep blues into into nearby red districts, and the red districts would absorb them. And then if in a normal year, if you did that, you could design a map like this and it would be 14 Republicans, 0 Democrats.
This isn't really relevant to your presentation, but I'm just curious. Did you see, as you were data, did you see any impact of the voter ID laws, like impacting like Democratic turnout or Republican turnout or anything like that? Do you see any data that says anything about that?
The general consensus now within political science research that focuses on that, early on it was thought it would impact distinct groups of voters. What the research is now showing is that voters adapt. That voters actually get the ID, or there are sufficient workarounds to cast a ballot, and that we actually asked a question on this past survey. There's a constitutional amendment being proposed for next November to require photo identification with a vote by mail ballot. Even Democrats approve of that amendment. There's a disparity,
Yeah.
but it's 52 or 54% Democratic approval for requiring photo identification by voting by mail. Sorry.
I wonder, I don't know really what question is, but like,
I'll throw it out there.
because language is so polarizing and like, and they use some labels and people are so triggered by, buzzwords.
Yeah.
Like I wonder, yeah, like I wonder if, like I wonder what would happen if the same like if the survey was looking at the same exact things using like language or like through example or something, if people would respond differently.
I don't know.
That's not really relevant.
I think, well,
Yeah.
I mean, I was very cautious, and I will give credit to YouGov. They understood the hype study.
Yeah.
So we were able to craft very similar questions that he asked so that we would have the comparability to it. The Janoff-Bullman research, she lays out enough principles behind the social order versus social justice that I felt comfortable in coming up with very conceivably neutral, but still associated with one idea over the other.
Yeah, I guess that was my question. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
Because I feel like people can have the examples would be a good way. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I think we just recently got done with a bunch of constitutional perspective questions. And the one thing that Allison actually acknowledged at the Constitution Day event was, in principle, these are all great things. Everybody agrees, freedom of speech. When you get rubber to the road kind of dynamics, and that's going to be a future survey that I want to do probably next year to put concrete ideas and issues that work into those principles and see where things might subtly shift, if not dramatically shift. Yeah, thank you. Are we doing this time? Other questions? Do you have?
I mean, I do, but mine are very nerdy and ill formed. But the one thing I was thinking when you're talking about the demographic and looking at some of those is I wondered if you looked at social class and SDS very much with this yet. I know there's the rural urban that plans differently.
Yeah.
But not only that, but I would be interested in seeing how intergenerational shifts in social class might shape someone's party. So if they have migrated, or if they're an immigrant to the middle class from a lower income class or from an upper income class, how might that change their value system and their?
So basically migration within demographic dynamic at play.
But I always think money is the thing, and poverty drives it all.
Sure, economics matters. I do have questions related to self-reporting economic status. I haven't honestly had time to kind of tease out a lot of that. I could probably do it by clumping things together to get enough numbers associated with it. I don't know. You mentioned generational dynamics as well. I think that there is a generational component potentially, and want to rerun those societal principles based on generational dynamics. Now I have to lump silent and boomers together, Gen X, and then millennials and Gen Zs to get sufficient amount of numbers in them. That's what I think, but I don't know for sure, and that could be a dynamic.
About recent generations in violating their granddaddy and switching.
Yeah, these, yeah.
So like, what are kids that are not fairly generational cohorts, as we think of them as national sense, but more like how it changes over time, how money within a family changes over time. Did you grow up?
Yeah, I would need to structure some very explicit questions around what has been your past as compared to today. Right. Yeah, yeah. This is getting me deep into public opinion weeds that I'm still trying to feel my way around, to be honest. So.
Well, are there economic trends within some of these spaces where we notice that this county actually used to be more middle class, or this congressional district actually used to be more middle class? We've noticed an economic decline in that area due to lack of support for like whatever the thing is, like the auto industry.
Yeah, I mean, well, tobacco, farming, that whole time. I mean, this whole region down east has been dramatically impacted by economic restructuring. And we've got county level data that I could at least look at and then back into it through the survey data to see if there is any impact in terms of the economic shifts, because we've got a lot going on here, you've got a lot going on here, and you know, this area, particularly in the mountains, just kind of been left behind at times in that regard.
To your points, like that area is also interesting, the southeast part, because that is where like the industrial hog complex farming industry is, and, which is like taken over so many, like provides jobs. Thank you for people there. But also it's like historically mistreated people, and so that's also, it's a weird conundrum in that place too.
There's a lot.
Well, because my lens is always particular. I'm just curious that there, I think both of those books interestingly map moral concepts, and I'm curious if anyone has looked at explicit religious identification in mapping those concepts onto alternating trends, especially within North Carolina.
I'm sure there probably has been some work done nationally. I don't know that literature. Okay.
Theory was used a lot looking at voting and values on a variety of different sort of things, podium, like that. And they thought that religion might be a contributing factor, but it was not. In the studies that I read, at least, what was instead was authoritarianism, which maps onto that authority line that we saw, and also social dominance orientation, which I think maps right onto the other perspective, right? Social order, probably.
Get there.
So because there was so much diversity within the dominant faith in the studies, Christianity, it's just these are these Christians and these are these Christians.
Right.
It's actually
different dynamic at play.
Well, denominationally, I'm not sure if it would change.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
my
Last question.
What, questions were asked for demographics, just as a, like, baseline?
So race, ethnicity, birth year. There's a whole standard battery of demographic questions. That, okay, sure, happy to do so. Thank you all very much for coming out on a Friday. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you all for coming. We have another colloquium next month. I don't recall the exact date, it'll be the last Friday of the month, and I know Amanda Bosch and our new QEP director will be presenting. If you want to give us a sneak peek.
We will be covering Big Link, which was talked about yesterday in the AI committee, which is how can you use this as a learning tool and an assessment tool with your students for a reduction of visualization of their learning. And so we'll be doing a demonstration of how that can be used and what use it for. And we have bought in it with the QEP, so I would love people to use it.
Still has slightly sweet.
Slight.